Hello, my name is Mateo Kries. I'm the director of the Vitra Design Museum, and today we're going to have a look at the architecture of our main exhibition building, which was designed by Frank Gehry in 1989. When we look at the museum building from outside, all the elements that you see have a function. So it's not a sculpture which is just meant to please aesthetically, but it's developed inside out, which means that there was a program of functions that had to be fulfilled inside the building, and Gehry made these functions visible to the outside. For example, we see that there is one tower outside, which is the tower for the elevator. We have a very outstanding element on the roof of the building. This is a cube that brings in daylight from the top into the exhibition spaces, so there are no windows to the outside, which is usually a requirement of exhibition spaces. And it has these ideal museum lighting conditions by having light from the ceiling, and the inclination of the cube on the roof of the museum is towards the south, so that the light is channeled in the exhibition spaces. We see this cube that brings in skylight here on top. So the interesting thing is it has the shape of a cross. And thanks to the cross shape, it serves the three main rooms of the museum. Then there are these organically shaped elements on the facade of the building, which also have a function because they include the staircases of the museum and the ramps to walk up to the first floor. Inside, we have rather simple white cube-like spaces. So it is a mix of the idea of the white cube and deconstructivist architecture, which brings in this element of play and of movement into the museum. What is also interesting is that Gehry created a lot of views through the whole museum building. So it is not closed spaces which follow each other, but we can also work with the visual impression of the transition of the spaces into each other. It's also interesting to look at this building in the context of museum architecture in general, because until the early 20th century, museum buildings were rather conventional buildings, just offering a succession of spaces to show mainly permanent displays of works and arts and collections. And then there were groundbreaking buildings in the 20th century, like Frank Gehry's Guggenheim Museum in New York, which was one of the first to show a completely different philosophy of a museum space. Wright's Guggenheim Museum was really about designing an experience while you walk through the space. And I would see this building by Gehry in the same tradition. It is also about the experience that you have when you walk through that building, when you have the different axes of views through the space. So it's also a kind of machine that is designing an experience. The building that Frank Gehry realized for the Vitra Design Museum was really important in Frank Gehry's career as an architect in general. First of all, we have to imagine that it was his first building that he realized in Europe. And with this building, he became much more known internationally. But the building was not only important in establishing Gehry's international reputation as an architect, but also important aesthetically and formally, because it showed a significant further evolution of his formal vocabulary. We see that the building is entirely white, just with a metal roof, and then a white building with rather simple volumes. So Gehry turned away from the visually contrasting materials and elements in his previous works. Even though it is very sculptural and expressive, it is also very simple, because the white color of the facade unifies the contrasting elements and makes it a monolithical structure, which in Gehry's work is rather rare. To understand the significance of the building, we have to look at two other elements in the architectural context of the 1980s. One is that there was this term of deconstructivism. It was a term that was meant to describe a new kind of architecture which was very dynamic, which was built out of volumes, lines, elements which were in a strong tension, which were, as the name says, not about showing the construction of the building, but seemingly deconstructing the architecture and showing it as a kind of explosion of elements. And there had been a very important exhibition at MoMA in New York in 1988, which had been curated by Philip Johnson and Mark Wigley. And within that exhibition, which basically created the term of deconstructivism, Frank Gehry already played an important role with buildings that he had designed until then. So also the building by Gehry here has to be seen in that context of deconstructivism. Another important element in the context of that building in the 1980s was the relation of architecture and media. Architectural theory discovered that the photography and the media communication of a building plays a very important role. And that had an influence of how buildings were designed. And this is also the case for Gehry's building. It has been designed to be a great museum space, but it is also a great photographic motive because it offers these many views, these beautiful plays of the shade, of the volumes from outside. So when the museum was opened in 1989, it was very quickly, very widely communicated, and the architectural language that the museum shows from the outside really helped to do that. I would say that this Gehry building for the Vitra Design Museum really is one of the early examples of where that idea comes from and how it can be used in a really amazing and artistic way to create a real icon of architecture history.